Before Jesus raised Lazarus from the dead, he prayed, but not the way you were taught, and not the way most Christians are ready to hear. What he did in those moments, the actual method, the inner posture, the doorway he walked through before power moved, that part was removed, not lost, removed. The words are still in your Bible, but the practice? The thing that made the words alive? That was taken out deliberately. And if you've ever felt like something's missing when you pray, like you're repeating scripts that don't carry the same weight they once did, you're not imagining it. You're remembering. This isn't for everyone. If you're here because you want your faith affirmed, this might not be the place. But if you've sensed that the way Jesus moved through the world wasn't just belief, it was method, then you're exactly where you need to be. Because what I'm about to show you changes everything you thought prayer was. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. Let's start with what you were given. You were taught that prayer is talking to God, asking, requesting, confessing, thanking, maybe even pleading, depending on how desperate things got. And you were told that if you prayed hard enough, believed strongly enough, asked sincerely enough, then maybe God would answer. Maybe he'd heal. Maybe he'd provide. Maybe he'd intervene, but only if it was his will. Only if the timing was right. Only if you deserved it. So you prayed. And sometimes things happened, and sometimes they didn't. And when they didn't, you were told it was because God said no, or because you didn't have enough faith, or because his plan was bigger than your understanding. You learned to accept that, to surrender to it, to believe that prayer was ultimately mysterious, that you could never really know if God was listening, or if your words were reaching him at all. And over time, prayer became something you did at God, a monologue, a wish list, a ritual you perform because that's what good Christians do. You bowed your head, you folded your hands, you closed your eyes and spoke into the silence, hoping someone was on the other side. But here's what nobody told you. That's not what Jesus did. When Jesus prayed, he wasn't asking God to change his mind. He wasn't trying to convince the Father of anything. He wasn't hoping for a response. He was doing something else entirely, something that had nothing to do with words and everything to do with where he went before he spoke them. And the difference between what he did and what you were taught to do, that difference is why his prayers moved mountains, and yours feel like they're hitting a ceiling. There's a reason you were never shown this, a reason the method was separated from the teaching. And it has everything to do with what happens when ordinary people discover they don't need permission to access what Jesus accessed. Because if you knew how to do what he did, if you understood that the power didn't come from asking but from aligning, you wouldn't need the institution to mediate your relationship with God anymore. You'd be free. And that was too dangerous to teach openly. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. Go back to the miracles, not to admire them, not to worship them, but to observe them. Look at what happens right before the moment of power. When Jesus healed the paralytic, the text says he saw their faith, and then he spoke. But between seeing and speaking, something happened. The Gospel of Mark doesn't name it. It just says he looked at the man, and then he said, "Rise, take up your bed, and walk." When he fed the 5,000, he took the loaves and the fish, and he looked up to heaven. That's what it says. He looked up, and then he blessed the food, and then it multiplied. When he walked on water, Matthew chapter 14 tells us he went up on the mountain alone to pray. Alone. In silence. Before he did the impossible. When he healed the woman with the issue of blood, he felt power go out from him. He didn't decide to heal her. He didn't pray for her healing. The power moved through him because he was already in a state where power could move. When he raised the widow's son at Nain, Luke chapter 7 says he was moved with compassion, and then he touched the coffin and spoke. But what happened between the compassion and the touch? The text doesn't say, it just moves past it. And when he called Lazarus out of the tomb, he stood at the entrance. And John chapter 11 verse 41 says he lifted his eyes and said, "Father, I thank you that you have heard me." Wait, stop there. He thanked the Father for already hearing him. Before Lazarus came out, before the miracle happened, before there was any visible evidence that anything had changed. He thanked him in the past tense, as if the thing was already done. Now, if prayer is asking God to do something, that makes no sense. You don't thank someone for doing something before they've done it. You don't speak in past tense about a future event, unless you're not in the future anymore, unless you've gone somewhere else. Entered a state where time works differently, where the separation between what is and what will be has collapsed. And that's exactly what Jesus did. He entered. And this is where almost everyone stops paying attention. But entered where? And more importantly, if this is something Jesus did consistently, every time before every act of power, why does no one talk about it? Why isn't this the first thing they teach you in church? Why, when you ask a pastor or priest how Jesus performed miracles, do they tell you it was because he was the Son of God, as if that explains anything, instead of showing you what he actually did? Because they don't know. The method was lost to them too. Matthew chapter 6, verse 6. Listen to how Jesus says it. But when you pray, go into your room, close the door, and pray to your Father who is in secret. And your Father who sees in secret will reward you. Your whole life, you've probably heard that as advice about privacy. Find a quiet place. Don't be showy. Pray in private where no one's watching. And that's fine. That's true on one level. But it's not what he meant. The Greek word Jesus used for room is temion. It means an inner chamber, a storehouse, a treasury, a hidden place inside something. Not a bedroom, not a cleated, an interior space. Jesus is giving you a location, and it's not external. He's saying, when you pray, go inward, into the part of you that exists beyond your thoughts, beyond your identity, beyond the noise of your mind and the pull of the outer world. Go into your inner room, and then, this is critical, he says close the door, not try to focus, not minimize distractions. Close the door, seal it. Shut out the world of the senses. Shut out the mind's chatter. Shut out the version of yourself that's afraid, that's wanting, that's asking. Because the Father doesn't live out there. He lives in secret, in the inner room, in the place most people never go because they don't even know it exists. And Jesus went there every single time before a miracle occurred. That's not speculation. That's pattern. Every healing, every raising, every moment where the invisible became visible, it followed the same sequence. Inward first, alignment, silence, and then power. He withdrew from the crowd. He went to the mountain. He stepped away from the noise and the need and the desperation of the people around him. Not because he didn't care, but because power doesn't come from the outer world. It comes from the inner room. And if you try to minister, to heal, to speak truth, while you're still standing outside that door, while you're still operating from your personality, your fear, your human limitations, you'll have nothing to give. But here's the problem. You were never taught how to go inward. You were taught to close your eyes and start talking, to think about God, to imagine him listening, to hope he's paying attention. But thinking about God is not the same as entering the place where God is, and that's why the miracle stopped. Not because God stopped listening, but because the method, the actual practice of going into the inner room and closing the door, was removed. And here's the question no one asks. If Jesus gave the instructions so plainly, why did no one teach you how to do it? Why, in 2,000 years of Christianity, has this become metaphor instead of method? What happened between the first century and now that turned a practice into a poem? Let me be very clear about something. The Bible wasn't falsified. The words of Jesus weren't changed. The scriptures you have are, for the most part, accurate transmissions of what was written. But here's what happened. The early church, the one that existed before councils, before creeds, before Rome took over, knew how to do what Jesus taught. They practiced it. They taught it to initiates. It was passed down quietly, carefully, in small communities where trust was everything. These weren't secrets kept out of arrogance. They were practices that required readiness, preparation, a certain quality of attention that couldn't be forced or faked. You couldn't teach someone how to enter the inner room if they hadn't first learned to be still. if they hadn't first learned to quiet the mind, if they hadn't first developed the capacity to recognize the difference between thinking about God and actually encountering the presence. And so the teaching was gradual, protected, reserved for those who demonstrated they were ready. But when Christianity became the religion of an empire, something shifted. The institution needed order, structure, something that could be taught at scale to masses of people in a way that didn't depend on interior development. And inner instruction doesn't survive that. You can't systematize silence. You can't standardize the inner room. You can't train priests to guide people into a place the priests themselves may never have entered. And so the method, the interior practice, the actual lived instruction, the step-by-step process of entering the inner room and closing the door, was gradually moved out of public teaching, not destroyed, not erased, just withheld. The words were kept, the parables were kept, the commandments were kept. But the instructions, the how, that was moved into the hands of the few. Monks in desert cells, mystics in hidden communities, the occasional saint who stumbled into it through years of solitary devotion, and over centuries, even they forgot. What remained were rituals, liturgies, prayers you could memorize, forms you could follow without ever having to go inward. You could be a good Christian, attend church, take communion, recite the creeds without ever once entering the inner room, and most people never did. So now you have millions of people repeating the Lord's Prayer, reciting psalms, bowing their heads and folding their hands, but they're doing it from the outside, from the mind, from the personality, from the place of want and fear. And the door to the inner room stays closed, not because God locked it, but because no one taught you how to open it. And the moment you realize that, the moment you see that the gap between you and what Jesus demonstrated isn't about worthiness or faith, but about technique, everything changes. Because technique can be learned, and what was removed can be remembered. Your soul already knows how to do this. It's been doing it since before you had language, since before you had identity. You just forgot. And now you're starting to remember. Here's what Jesus understood that's almost completely missing from modern Christianity. Prayer isn't about persuading God. It's about coherence. Let me say that again because this is the hinge point. Prayer, the kind Jesus practiced, isn't about convincing God to do something. It's about entering a state of alignment where you and the source are no longer separate, where your will and the Father's will are the same, where there's no gap, no distance, no division, just union. And from that place, when you speak, you're not hoping reality will change. You're recognizing that it already has. That's why Jesus spoke in past tense at Lazarus' tomb. That's why he thanked the Father before the miracle appeared. Because from inside the inner room, from the place of alignment, the future and the present collapse into one. What you see with physical eyes hasn't caught up yet, but in the realm of cause, in the invisible, it's already done. And so you speak from that knowing, not from want, not from hope, not from the anxiety of asking. You speak from agreement, from alignment, from the place where the Father's will and your will are no longer divided. You don't beg, you don't plead. You speak from the place where it's already finished. Listen to how Jesus said it in John chapter 14, verse 10. The words that I say to you I do not speak on my own authority, but the Father who dwells in me does his works. He's not taking credit. He's not claiming personal power. He's saying, I'm not doing this. The Father is doing it through me. But notice, he doesn't say the Father is doing it for him or to him. He says through him, meaning Jesus became the vessel, the doorway, the place where heaven and earth met. And he did that by entering the inner room and closing the door to everything that wasn't God, but only from that place, only from the inner room. If you try to speak from your personality, from your ego, from your separated mind, nothing happens because you're not aligned. You're still outside the door. And the outer world doesn't respond to separation. It responds to source. And you only access source when you go where Jesus went, inward, behind the door, into the silence that exists before thought, before identity, before the noise of your own wanting. This is why he spent 40 days in the wilderness before his ministry began. This is why he went up to the mountain to pray before choosing the 12. This is why he withdrew to solitary places again and again, even when the crowds were pressing in. He wasn't recharging, he wasn't resting, he was realigning. He was going back into the inner room, closing the door, and remembering who he was beyond the human personality. And every time he did, he came back with power. Now, I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, okay, so how do I do that? What's the technique? What are the steps? And I'm going to give you something, but not everything. Because if I gave you the full method right now, if I laid out every part of what Jesus actually did, you wouldn't value it. You'd try it once, maybe twice, and then move on. The inner room only opens for those who are willing to stay at the threshold. So here's what I'll give you. This is the beginning, not the whole thing, but the entry point. If you want to go where Jesus went, you have to stop doing what you've been doing. Stop talking to God in your head. Stop asking. Stop wanting. Stop imagining him somewhere out there, listening. Instead, do this. Sit. Be still. Close your eyes. And instead of starting to pray, just breathe. Not special breathing, not a technique. Just notice your breath. Feel it move in. Feel it move out. And with each exhale, let go of one layer of noise. Let go of the thoughts. Let go of the day. Let go of the you that's worried about tomorrow or replaying yesterday. Just breathe. And as you do, begin to feel for the place behind your thoughts, the stillness that's always there, the silence underneath the noise. It's subtle. You won't hear a voice. You won't see a vision. But if you stay there, if you resist the urge to start talking, start asking, start performing prayer, you'll begin to feel it. A presence. Not external, not separate, but closer than your own breath, closer than your own heartbeat. That's the edge of the inner room. And when you feel it, don't rush forward. Don't try to make something happen. Just be there. That's all. For now. Stay in that place, even if it feels like nothing's happening. Even if your mind tries to pull you back into thinking, into wanting, into the familiar pattern of asking. Stay. Because the door doesn't open by force. It opens by recognition. And recognition takes time. You might sit there for 5 minutes and feel nothing. You might sit for 10 and think you're doing it wrong, but you're not. You're learning to be still, to close the door, to stop talking long enough to hear. You're learning what it feels like to not be the voice in your head, to not be the one who's afraid, to not be the one who needs something. You're learning to rest in the presence that's always been there, waiting for you to notice. And that's the first part, the foundation. Without this, nothing else works. You can learn every prayer technique in the world. You can memorize scripture. You can fast and worship and serve. But if you never learn to enter the inner room, if you never learn to close the door and be still, you'll always be praying from the outside. And the outside has no power. But here's what I'm not telling you yet. There's a second part. A deeper instruction. There was something Jesus did after the stillness, after the alignment, after he entered the inner room and closed the door. Not a word, not a request. A movement of awareness that turned alignment into authority. A shift in identity that allowed him to speak as the Father, not just to the Father. And once you see it, you'll understand why it was never taught publicly, because it's not something you can perform, it's something you become. And that part, the part that allows you to speak from source instead of self, that's what we'll talk about next time. If you're still here, you're one of the ones who senses it. You've felt the gap, the disconnect, the way your prayers seem to echo in empty space. And now you know why. You were taught the words, but you were never taught the method. You were given a map, but no one showed you how to walk. And that's not your fault, but it is your responsibility now. Because once you know the inner room exists, once you've been shown that Jesus went somewhere before power moved, you can't pretend you don't know. You're awake to it now. And the only question left is whether you're willing to do the work of actually going there. Not everyone is. Most people want miracles, they want results, they want proof, but they don't want to sit in silence. They don't want to let go of control. They don't want to stop talking long enough to hear. And that's fine. That's their path. But if you're different, if you're one of the few who's willing to stay at the threshold, to practice what Jesus actually practiced, to enter the inner room even when nothing dramatic happens at first, then you're ready for what comes next, because there's more. There's a second layer to this, a deeper instruction, something Jesus did after the stillness that turned prayer into power, something that cannot be explained, only experienced. And in the next video, I'm going to show you what it was, but I'm only going to show it to those who've already begun, to those who've already sat in the silence, who've already felt for the edge of the inner room, who've already tasted what it's like to stop being the voice in their head, even for a moment. Because the second part doesn't work without the first. And I'm not here to give methods to people who won't use them. I'm here for the ones who are ready, the ones who've been waiting their whole lives for someone to tell them the truth, the ones who knew deep down that there was more to Jesus than what the church was showing them. You were right. There is more, and you're about to find it. So if that's you, if you've already started, or if you're about to, then I'll see you in the next one. What you've touched in this transmission was never meant to end with a video. There are deeper writings, quiet reflections, and simple practices that help you return to the inner room again and again. We call them the sacred scrolls. Each scroll carries a fragment of the original way, not sermons, not arguments, but guidance into stillness, alignment, and remembrance. They exist to help you practice what Jesus practiced, not to believe more, but to go inward. They are not written to persuade anyone. They are offered only for those who have felt the silence open, and who know that words alone are no longer enough. You'll find the sacred scrolls in the description and the pinned comment. And if this path has made you feel like you no longer belong fully in the old structures, you're not alone. We've created a quiet gathering place where those learning to pray inwardly can walk together, not to debate, not to perform faith, but to remember it. It's a private space where the scattered ones read, reflect, and practice returning to the inner room in daily life. If something in you recognizes that, the doorway is waiting in the description and pinned comment. There's no rush. Stillness cannot be forced. Truth reveals itself when you're ready. Those who are meant to find this always do. Now, go inward, close the door, and wait. The Father who sees in secret is already there. He's been there the whole time, waiting for you to remember.